They joined together in the belief that by following this man, they could overcome death.
You have to trust me.
We were advancing and developing our soul to match a place in the next level.
You have to believe me.
Instead, they ended their lives in a mass suicide that stunned the nation.
Gruesome discovery.
Investigators found 39 young men dead.
In a prone position.
Dressed in a similar, if not identical fashion.
The mind that was in Jesus, that mind is in me.
Rancho Santa Fe, a wealthy community in northern San Diego County. On the morning of March 26, 1997, a strange van pulls up to a multi-million-dollar home on Colina Norte. A man goes in the front door with a camera, then leaves a half hour later. That afternoon, the phone rang at the San Diego coroner's office.
One of my investigators received a phone call from Sheriff's Dispatch that said, we have approximately 10 people who apparently have committed suicide in Rancho Santa Fe. And said, okay, thanks for the heads up, we'll get ready.
10 bodies was bad enough, but by the time Calvin Vine reached the crime scene, that number had skyrocketed. This was the biggest mass suicide ever on American soil.
What they discovered was 39 deceased persons that were in the residence.
All we knew at first was that there were a lot of bodies inside the house. And I remember the first real detail that the police gave us was that it was 39 men.
The victims were all male, adults, somewhere in the vicinity of ages 18 to 24.
Detectives soon learned that what they thought were 39 men were actually 18 men and 21 women. And most of them were well past their 20s.
And I was thinking, well, how could they have gotten that wrong? They got it wrong because they were all dressed alike, they had all shaved their heads, they had been dead, some of them for several days at that point, so that the bodies pretty much all looked alike.
Probably the most surprising to me was that the members themselves were just normal, average people. Just average people. Some were plumbers, some were computer software engineers, some were just actors. I mean, they were just average, normal people that you would just never expect to be a part of something like this.
This scene was pretty unreal, and I was not sure what I was expecting. What was the manner? How did they kill themselves? You know, is it going to be a bloody, gory scene? It's peaceful.
Then Calvin Vine entered a room with a bank of computers, all flashing an ominous warning.
Red alert, it just kept flashing. Have they bombed it? You know, is this place rigged? Is it going to blow up or what?
There were no explosives or booby traps, but there were strange secrets to be revealed by the recently departed.
And then the details just heaped one upon the other, that they were dressed alike, they looked alike, their heads were shaved. And then it turns out that they had some sort of Star Trek-y looking banner draped over their chests.
You can see, has been reported in the press, that most of the victims covered in purple shrouds.
It was getting stranger and creepier as time went on. And then the coroner says, not only is it a mix of men and women, but at the time, they said 8 of the men had been surgically castrated. And that just opened a door to, you know, all kinds of other things that we learned about what that cult was about.
What this cult was all about is a story that begins decades earlier. The exact date and circumstances are clouded in mystery. But sometime in the spring of 1972, in the city of Houston, Texas, Marshall Applewhite met Bonnie Lou Nettles.
Bonnie Nettles was a nurse. She was married. She had 4 children. Marshall Applewhite had also been married. He had 2 children.
They may have seemed like ordinary folk, but they were each becoming more and more alienated from Texas society. In her late 40s, Bonnie was deeply involved in astrology and New Age religions.
She was, besides being a nurse, she was also kind of a small potatoes psychic in the area. She would lead seances, and you know, she had people who she believed spoke to her, other beings. And she had received a message at some point that told her she was going to meet a man who looked just like Marshall Applewhite.
Applewhite was really a kind of gifted guy. He was a teacher, he was a performer, he was a very talented singer, well known in Houston theater circles. He was attractive, charismatic. He could convince anyone of almost anything.
But he was a 41-year-old man struggling with his sexual identity. He'd been married, then divorced, and along the way been driven out of his college teaching jobs for having affairs with his male students.
There was a period of time when he was quite mentally distraught by these conflicts in his life. And he, at that time, is when he met Bonnie Nettles, who was a nurse. He met her in the hospital. And she apparently convinced him that they were soulmates, that they were meant to be together.
And Marshall convinced her that they keep their relationship chaste. Celibacy would be the answer to his sexual confusion. What they both agreed on was the need to leave Texas and their family lives behind. So this odd middle-aged couple took off on an uncharted journey onto what was called the hippie trail of the American West.
When they did this traveling across the country, they sequestered themselves for a while near the Rogue River in Oregon, and they spent 6 months there, apparently. And when they came out, they said they had had this awakening and that God had come to them, and they were the two messengers presenting this message from the Bible, from Revelations. And nobody really knows what happened in those 6 months. Like, did they take drugs? Did they just meditate intensely? Did they run around the woods naked? We don't really know. Shortly after that, it evolved to the point that he became Jesus. He was Jesus come back, and she was God the Father.
In their telling, Jesus had arrived 2,000 years earlier in a spacecraft to prepare people for the next level above human, then was crucified before the mission was completed. Now, the mind of the Savior had returned, again in a UFO, and entered into the body of Marshall Applewhite. From this point on, Marshall said his human body was only a vehicle, something to carry his higher consciousness until he could ascend to the next level.
Marshall Applewhite recast himself as a kind of messianic figure, and messiahs need people to save.
So these two misfits from Texas, who now said they were Jesus and God the Father, set off to find disciples.
Let's just go ahead and do it. Trust God to get the results, you know, whatever happens.
California in the early 1970s, a time like no other. A time of gurus from the East and prophets from the West. Jesus people, Hare Krishnas, Scientologists, Hindu yogis, and radical communes.
It was really a huge marketplace of things that people could check out and get involved in, and there was no end to it.
Into this crowded marketplace, looking for disciples, came Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles. But that's not what they were calling themselves now. At first, they were the Two, then Bo and Peep, Guinea and Pig, and finally, after the notes on the musical scale, T and Do. But if they were going to be messianic leaders, they needed to come up with their own gospel.
They began to evolve a kind of theology or philosophy that was a combination of sci-fi meets the Bible meets Star Trek.
The idea of UFOs bringing deliverance to the human race was key to attracting followers.
In the 70s and 80s, it was a big UFO phenomenon. And so that was the times back then, was people really believed that there were UFOs. And so here comes a guy with a group that says, hey, we're representatives of that group, of that culture. We're representatives of UFO, of these extraterrestrials that you've been seeing, and we're real people.
But more than real people, the actual reincarnation of the mind of Jesus Christ.
So the one or the mind that was in Jesus What? That mind is in me? I am the return of the Son of my Father. I must admit that I am here again, that I'm here saying exactly the same thing that I said then.
It was at a Los Angeles meeting in 1975 that Marshall and Bonnie recruited their very first disciples. Among them was Dick Jocelyn.
All of us had different reasons for coming in, but I know all of us were seekers. That's like fundamental.
That was the story for all of those who responded to Marshall and Bonnie's appeal. 19-year-old David Moore found out about the group when he was living near Berkeley, California.
David was searching for something and was asking a lot of questions. David had gone to some meetings and he went with some friends.
At the meetings, Marshall Applewhite put on a powerful performance.
What I say to you now is direct transmission from the kingdom level above human, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and of my Father.
He was well educated, he was well spoken, he was a charismatic person who was able to convince others that he was in fact who he claimed, and they followed him.
But you have to know me. You have to trust me. You have to believe me.
I felt that it was my soul that I identify as now, kind of taking me by the shirt and saying, this is something we have to do. We have to do it now.
Rob Balch was a college instructor who infiltrated the group as part of his research on cults. He was stunned by how quickly people reacted to Marshall and Bonnie's message.
One guy showed up with his backpack ready to go. A young couple had already given away their house. They had their truck packed with camping gear. They were ready to go.
I knew that if I didn't do it, I was giving up the whole reason for my existence, in a sense. That's what I came away from that with. This was why I existed.
Their congregation was growing, but there was a catch. Most cults demand that their members cut off ties to their families. Heaven's Gate took that to an extreme.
From the minute you joined, you had to give up everything from your past. You had to give up your former life, your former friends, your way of being. You had to literally leave everything behind you. Those were rules of the group. So immediately upon joining, you were cut off.
Jesus said, if you want to know my Father, if you want to move in my Father's kingdom, then shed everything of this world, leave everything behind, and come and follow me. And unless you hate everything of this world, your sister, your mother, your brother, everything of this world, you will not know the kingdom of heaven. You have to graft to me. You have to cling to me. I will take you to my Father's house.
When David Moore decided to join the group, he told his brother to pass the news on to their mother.
I have some news. David's leaving. And I said, leaving for where? And is he taking a job somewhere? No, he's leaving for good. And I said, what do you mean leaving for good? He said, he's going away to join a group, these T and O people that have been giving meetings in the Bay Area. And I just started to cry.
David agreed to meet his mother for 20 minutes before he took off to join the group at an undisclosed location.
He said, I don't know if this is the right thing for me, but it feels like the answer to something I've been looking for a long, long time. And I was not to see him again for 10 years.
12 candles for 12 birthday years.
Backlog years.
Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles were on a roll, attracting dozens of new followers. In Modesto, California, 20-year-old Guy St. Louis got an excited call from his older brother Gary about a meeting in San Francisco.
He had heard about Bo and Peep, and this was in 1975, and he approached me on the subject and said, hey, what do you think about this? He said, do you want to go to San Francisco with me? I said, yeah, let's go. So we hopped in a car one night.
Of the two brothers, Gary had the most immediate reaction to what he'd heard that night.
came back and said, it's true. Everything that I've believed in my entire life is true, and these two people have the key to what I need. I thought, hey, good for you. You know, I mean, it's great. This has been something he's been searching for since he's a kid. So Gary came back home, got his belongings together, told his wife he was leaving, gave everything away, gave his wife everything.
But no one in the family knew just what kind of commitment Gary had made when he joined up with Applewhite and Nettles.
This was a group where families had no idea, most of the time, where their children were.
And the families had no idea of what was going on inside the group.
And we were with them, and they taught us on a daily basis, and we talked about the Bible, and we talked about spacecrafts, everything. And they taught that, like, if I didn't like something about Teo, it wasn't that I didn't like something about him, it was that my helpers, my spirit helpers, maybe didn't like something about his spirit helpers. And so when I would talk to him, I would say, well, Teo, you know, there's an influence with me that makes me see you as being too severe and harsh. And he would say, well, you know, there's an influence with me that makes me see your influences as being too sloppy or lighthearted. And that's how
But the main lesson they learned was to follow closely in the footsteps of Applewhite and Nettles.
The information given to me by my teachers, T and Do, is the only thing that makes any sense to me.
T and Do are the way and the truth and the only source of life. And without our connection to T and Do, we have nothing.
What Applewhite was able to do with his followers was take away their sense of who they were. He did this by making them really all assume an identical identity. They were androgynous. They were neither male or female.
The task of overcoming the human kingdom requires that they overcome flesh, the genetic vibrations, the lust of the flesh, the desire to reproduce, the desire to cling to offspring or spouse or parents.
We lived like we were living in a monastery. We were all celibate individuals looking forward to self-advancement. We were advancing and developing our soul to match a place in the next level.
Any emotional tie that would connect you to the planet, to connect you to the human level, anything that would keep you here, any human level desire, all of those things had to be overcome.
Applewhite even went so far as to rename his disciples.
And they had to change their names and use this little ending, O-D-Y. And he even talked about it as this was a diminutive. These are the little young'uns. These are the children of God, O-D-Y.
There's Leody, Eva Odie, the June Odie, Sam Odie. Sir Odie's the clown of the class. Todd Odie, Ava Odie, Press Odie.
So you've given people new names, you've given them new clothes, you've separated them from any environment they knew before, and you're basically infantilizing them.
Look at the camera, Steely. Hi, where's your normals? There. Ah, good.
It was the two leaders or teachers who were guiding the way to the next evolutionary level above human.
They were in training to be able to withstand this spaceship trip to the other level. They believed they were going to literally, their bodies were going to metamorphose.
We weren't a crazy group of people that some people with narrow minds might call a cult. We were a class, an advanced class for higher learning, and that's how we lived. This class was very important to me, and it was my life.
Initiate docking procedures, Alex Odie. Maneuvering thrusters only. What you're seeing is an actual push assistance.
As they roamed from town to town, the class was taught to search for cosmic signs in the most mundane places.
MOON, that spells spacecraft.
They would spend hours examining cloud formations and studying packaged food labels, looking for what Applewhite had told them were hidden messages.
Best to consume before the end of the world. The end of the world, okay.
Best before end of the world.
For the families they left behind, however, the years of waiting and worrying were becoming unbearable.
I'd find myself welling up in tears in the supermarket and at unexpected and inopportune times, and I felt like I just can't live like this, but I don't know what to do.
Things looked even worse when Nancy heard the news of the People's Temple suicides in Jonestown, Guyana.
At the time of the People's Temple demise, I thought, it could be David. For all I know, he's went and joined that group, and I don't know where he is or how he is, if he's even living.
It was then that Nancy realized there must be other families going through the same thing that she was.
So after I had that insight that I was not alone, I thought, well, where are the other families, the other parents, the siblings of the people that David are with? They're just as concerned as I am.
Nancy Brown had heard about Rob Balch's infiltration of the Heaven's Gate cult. He provided her contact information for other families.
Suzanne left in June 1980.
She received back dozens of letters, each telling different versions of the same story.
Jeff left San Diego in November 1975.
Gary left to join the group with a friend Keith from
Of family members disappearing into Heaven's Gate.
Looking for meaning to life.
For Nancy Brown, the letters were a relief, but she did not yet know the upheaval she had unwittingly set in motion. The game had now changed. Family members of the Heaven's Gate cult had now connected with each other in a network. At its center was Nancy Brown.
And they wanted to know what I had wanted to know, you know, where is my son or daughter or brother or father, uncle, whatever, and are they all right? Are they going to come home?
What Nancy didn't know was that news of her family network had reached Marshall Applewhite, who became alarmed at the prospect of being tracked down. He convinced his followers that they could be found and kidnapped.
We were aware that some people will stop at nothing to take away your sovereignty.
It was the family members and the friends of the vehicles that would be the most hostile towards it and try and pull those people back into the world.
We thought that there was a possibility of some sort of confrontation.
It was then that, out of the blue, Nancy Brown received a phone call from David that sounded as if he was reading from a script.
Hello, this is your son David. If you want to know how you can help, you would print in your newsletter the names of those parents who will promise not to kidnap their family members.
It's possible that in that phone message they were trying to be a bit threatening, and the group was obviously trying to exert its power.
If they don't start dictating to them what they should be doing with their lives, I'll promise you that most of these parents will hear from their loved ones pretty quickly.
I think we kind of had an upper hand because we'd already gotten under their skin. We weren't going to stop.
To try and get the families to back off, Applewhite and Nettles allowed some of their followers to return home for brief visits.
I was just so pins and needles waiting for the doorbell to ring, and I came down the stairs and opened the door, and that was one of the best days of my life to see him standing there. It was like 1,000 butterflies had been released into the sky. You know, it was just such happiness to see him.
Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Ready, Fry?
But though he was home, David was never really away from the group.
At regular intervals, he would excuse himself to go to a payphone, and he'd call in to his partner and did a check-in. And I think this was a way of T and Doe making sure they were okay, that no families were trying to pull a fast one.
Happy birthday, dear David. Happy birthday to you.
During most of the visit, David was playing the part of the emotionally detached disciple of Heaven's Gate.
And then when this thing came along, it was like, this is what I've been waiting for. It's like somebody sounding the trumpet.
But when it came time to say goodbye, Nancy knew that all the influence of Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles couldn't take away the boy she had known years ago.
David gave the greatest hugs. David did everything he did wholeheartedly. And when he gave you a hug, you knew you were hugged. He really hugged you. So I'll always miss his hugs. The 2 times I saw him, and I took him to the airport, and each time there were tears in his eyes, not just mine, and he gave me a big hug, and it was a gift. I thank him for that.
See you later, guys.
I thank him for that because I knew that he loved me. I'll never doubt that he loved me and his family.
Other families were getting surprise visits as well.
After about 12 years of him being gone, my grandmother was on her deathbed. She said, you know, what I would like to do before I die is see Gary. And he walked in the door.
Gary's 2 sisters, Erin and Dana, were barely teenagers when he'd left.
When he came back, he was very thin and he looked very healthy. The whole family was just ecstatic. It was pretty overwhelming.
But what was more overwhelming was that after 12 years inside Heaven's Gate, Gary decided to stay in the outside world.
It was great to have him back. It was very easy to forget about where my brother had been because he's here now. He's living a normal life. He's got a job. He's fit back into mainstream society.
Gary started a new life for himself in Denver, which is where he met Shelley King.
A few times that we were together, we would have fun and we would laugh and we would joke. I fell in love with him, heart and soul. Just, he was it for me.
But back inside the Heaven's Gate group, there was a greater threat to its existence than a few defecting members. In 1985, Bonnie Lou Nettles, T to Marshall's Doe, died of cancer. To a group that believed they were overcoming death, this was devastating.
When T died, that was a major turning point for the group because up until that time, the message had always been that the only way that you could enter the kingdom of heaven was in your living physical body, by physically getting on board that spaceship and going to the kingdom of heaven.
And yet, their main leader dies of this very mundane earthly disease, cancer.
No spaceship came down. There was no resurrection after her death. She ended up being cremated, and they scattered her ashes in a lake in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas.
Bonnie Lou Nettles' death set in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy years later. With Bonnie Lou Nettles gone, Marshall Applewhite, known as Doe, now led the Heaven's Gate group alone.
Doe was very depressed and weepy and teary-eyed and distraught, and at one point he called everybody together and said, God, maybe I'm crazy, maybe this is all crazy, maybe we're all crazy, maybe we should just all go home and forget about it. And everybody pulled behind him and said, no, 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 Doe, we believe you, we're into this, let's go ahead with it.
Even members who'd left Heaven's Gate were finding themselves drawn back in. In Denver, Gary St. Louis shocked Shelley King by telling her he was leaving to rejoin a group she had never even heard of.
It was very frightening that he was just going to up and leave. He had made this decision, and there was not a whole lot anybody could say to persuade him to stay.
Today is February 12th, 1992. It is Wednesday.
Shelley videotaped Gary as he was packing to leave and could see that he was already stripping himself of human emotions. It was the Heaven's Gate way.
This place is a garden where souls are grown. Souls always have free will. They have the choice to go whichever direction they want. They can choose to listen to this direction. They can choose to listen to that one.
The St. Louis family also had to deal with Gary's leaving, but that wasn't the worst of it. Gary wasn't going back alone. Erin found out when she got a call from her sister, Dana.
And she called me and she said, this is your sister, I have something to tell you. And I said, what's that, sister? And she says, I'm leaving with Gary to go to with the group. And I just was in just total shock. I had no idea that this would even ever happen. And that was it. I never talked to her again. We never saw him again.
The group that Gary rejoined was more hardcore than ever. Celibacy had always been the rule, but many of the male disciples were deciding to raise the level of their commitment and take celibacy one irreversible step further.
And that's where the idea for castration came from.
And it's been speculated that they went to Mexico or they went somewhere and electively did this surgery.
Everyone that was interested in it was very excited in having it done. As you can well imagine, it would help them control their vehicle, which was the whole point.
Some students had proven to him that they desired to have their vehicles neutered. And I'm one of those students that did that.
But the big question was, after all these years of preparation, where was the spacecraft to take them to the next level? To keep themselves focused on that dream, the group held round-the-clock screenings of movies like Close Encounters and Cocoon, stories that featured humans ascending into the heavens on alien spacecraft.
They would sit and literally watch these movies over and over and over. And Doe would explain to them that the fact that these kinds of movies were coming out and certain kinds of programs were on television were actually these messages coming to them through the waves, telling them that, yes, they were doing the right thing.
And T said this apparently, that fiction can often open up a mind or a brain to advanced possibilities which are actually a lot closer to the truth, to fact.
When they weren't watching videos, Applewhite took his followers out into the desert, telling them that the spaceship would be arriving that night.
One time, they said, we finally got a date for our departure. And we packed up the whole camp that night, got all ready to go, and then about 1 o'clock in the morning, looks like we're not going. So we unpacked the whole camp, set it back up, and the next morning they just said, well, looks like we're not gonna, or they said, we feel like we have egg on our face. We don't know, we thought we had it. If you all wanna go home, go home. We understand. And nobody left. Nobody left.
Heaven's Gate was now down to a few dozen members, but the group had been together for over 2 decades with little to show for it. Things were now looking bleak.
Doe became convinced that he was dying of cancer. So it's a situation where they're getting older and older, and they've kind of painted themselves into a corner where they are running out of options.
It looked like they'd have to give up their dream of ascending to the next level above human. But then the unexpected happened. On a July night in 1995, an amateur astronomer named Alan Hale was scanning the skies near his home in rural New Mexico.
Have a look.
And saw a fuzzy object millions of miles away.
A few minutes later, I had verified that the object was moving against the background star. So we have a fuzzy object that's moving. It's clearly a comet. There are no known comets in that location. So I was able to report I've discovered a comet.
Named Hale-Bopp after the astronomers who discovered it, this comet quickly emerged as a giant. As it got nearer to Earth, it became the second brightest comet in history. That's when bizarre theories started emerging.
There were stories coming out that there was a spaceship trailing the comet, that in the trail of the comet, the wisps, you could see this little spaceship. So in their mind, they reframed this to believe that this was T coming from the next level, coming down in the spaceship, coming to get them, and that this was their time to get ready and be picked up.
But Hale-Bopp would only be in the skies a limited time. Applewhite convinced his followers that this is what they'd been waiting for all these years. To seize the moment, to ascend to the next level above human, they would have to, in their words, exit their vehicles.
This is March 19, 1997, and let me say that our mission here at this time is about to come to a close in the next few days.
They made videos explaining what they were about to do.
We're right at the point where you can't stay there any longer without being significantly disturbed by what has to happen to this planet.
I have a few words about why I'm here with the class about to take this final step.
My constant asking long before I entered the class was the key, the constant begging for the real facts, the real truth.
I had suspected for some time that I was here for
some type of task, not knowing what it was.
I'm no longer satisfied or fulfilled by any human pursuit, indulgence, or activity.
Stand up there, and so that we can take a look at your uniform.
For this final journey, special all-black uniforms were made, and special patches that said,
Heaven's Gate Away Team. And that's exactly what that means to us. We've been away, and now we're going back.
To complete the task, they would go in stages, divided into 3 groups. Applewhite was in the middle group. A special recipe was written out, a lethal combination of pills and vodka. Included were instructions on how to ingest this medicine. The final note, lay down, relax, and you should fall asleep fairly soon. As each member passed on, they were carefully laid out with a purple shroud.
I feel that they did that with a sense of dignity, and they also did it out of a sense of respect and consideration for the ones that find them.
By the evening of March 25, 1997, the house on Colina Norte was silent. In the skies above, the Hale-Bopp comet was at its brightest, and people across the nation were staring at it in wonder.
I was pretty excited about the Hale-Bopp comet coming, and I couldn't wait till we could see it in the skies. And I had no idea. Of course, it would be a harbinger of the worst news I've ever had in my life.
On the morning of March 26, 1997, Rio D'Angelo received a Federal Express delivery that he knew was from fellow members of Heaven's Gate, the group he'd left just a few weeks earlier.
Inside were letters from the group. The opening of one letter said that by the time you receive this, we will have exited our vehicles. So I knew.
Rio drove to Heaven's Gate headquarters in Rancho Santa Fe and found an open door.
When I went in there, I knew that, for one thing, it was very spooky. You know, as you can imagine, being around so many bodies that were dead, that, you know, there was no life, and I began looking for a possibility of somebody maybe survived, but there was nobody.
Rio went back home to Los Angeles and made an anonymous call to 911.
We received a call at approximately 3:15, 3:30 this afternoon.
That night, the first sketchy reports were shown on TV.
The description of a gruesome discovery in this Rancho Santa Fe home,
where investigators found 39 young men dead.
They were all in a prone position,
dressed in a similar, if not identical fashion.
The next morning, though, further details began to emerge.
The investigators do say that the victims, ages range from 20 to 72.
And that's what I heard, that more news, that they had found more than just a few bodies, and they weren't just all in their 20s. And so I leapt out of bed and turned the TV on. But all during this, I still kept hoping that David wasn't there.
They were shedding their human containers.
And I immediately, right then, knew. I don't know why, but I called my brother, Guy, and I said, turn on the TV. I said, I think it's them.
And even as the bodies were received at the coroner's office this morning, all of them had already been identified. Apparently, they were carrying identification in the pockets of their tunics, and the notification of families has already begun.
The phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and this voice said, "This is the San Diego coroner's office." And I knew immediately there's only one reason he would be calling me, and that was the end of hope, the end of my 20-some years of hoping for a long life relationship with my son, David.
Hi, Mom. I think it was just mostly shock at first. Just total, I mean, of course we were all upset and crying, but just, I think, in disbelief.
This is my Shelley haircut.
For Shelley King, 1997 was the end of 5 years of waiting and hoping that Gary St. Louis, the man she called Steel, would return.
I won't have to wait around saying, he'll come back, he'll come back. So, I miss him terribly, I always have. We all lost people that we really cared about. But deep down in each one of them, I'm sure they cared about us too. I feel really sad that Steele's family lost not only him, but his sister. Also, I feel for them a lot.
We lost two very special people. And as I'm sure there was a lot of other members of the group that were the same, intelligent, loving people, they will all be missed, but I don't think anybody will ever be forgotten.
But there were survivors, members who'd left the group or just been away when the suicide plans were made. Tragically, two of those survivors ultimately decided to follow their comrades.
Hi, my name is Rick Cody, and by the time that you see this tape, I'll be gone. I'll be leaving this vehicle, and they will probably find this vehicle in a motel somewhere, and I'm going to be leaving in much the same way that my classmates and my older member left.
Here you have this group that started out promising people they could overcome death, that this would not happen by suicide, and in the end, that is what they do.
They did not harm anybody out here. They did not take children with them when they left. They did not. The worst part about this group was that they took the people away from their families. That's the worst thing that they did.
I teach fractions, and when I'm explaining to a student what's a fraction, I say it's a part of a whole, but whenever the top number is the same as the bottom number, like 4/4 or 8/8, it means one whole. So when I think, oh, David died at 42, he only lived half a life, no. He lived a whole life. 42, 40 seconds, a whole life.
Heaven's Gate was composed of really caring, loving, and good people. What was wrong with Heaven's Gate was Marshall Applewhite. He was not good. He was ultimately a man that destroyed all the lives of these people.
The mind that was in Jesus, that mind is in me. You'll have to decide that for yourself.
The Heaven's Gate suicides occurred in March 1997. Footage was taken within Heaven's Gate over the course of several years before the suicides. Not all individuals depicted in the footage took part in the suicides or castrations.